Now that your husband is dead, grieve, pack your bags and never come back. Kelsey said that coldly as the three of us sat at the dinner table. And Nathan, my son, simply smiled softly and nodded. This house was never really yours. I didn't respond. I just quietly stood up and walked away from the table like an uninvited guest. The next morning, I went to the bank. I'm so glad you're here. Please stay with me until the end of this story, and don't forget to leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story has traveled. The dining room that day felt strangely empty, even with 3 people sitting around the familiar mahogany table. Robert's chair, my recently deceased husband, was still there but empty. I kept glancing at it, longing for the gentle smile and warm eyes he had given me throughout our 32 years of marriage. We had buried Robert just a week earlier, 1 week since I had stood beside his grave, feeling like half of my soul had been ripped away. I'm 71. I thought I was ready for this day, but no one is ever truly ready for that kind of pain. Pass the potatoes, Kelsey said. Her voice was as sharp as shattered glass. I nodded, my hand trembling slightly as I picked up the porcelain bowl. The funeral had drained me more than I realized. And though Kelsey had been my daughter-in-law for the past 15 years, she had never once spoken to me in a warm tone. Nathan sat between us like a referee who had already chosen a side. He avoided my gaze all evening, keeping his eyes fixed on his wife. I tried to break the tension in the air. Your father's funeral was beautiful, wasn't it? I said, trying to keep my tone light. He would have been so touched to see so many people come to say goodbye. Kelsey slowly set down her fork deliberately, as if to draw attention. Yes, and actually, we wanted to talk to you about something, Margaret. My heart tightened. I looked back and forth between her and Nathan, hoping to see some glimmer of family affection. But there was none. Only cold calculation in Kelsey's eyes and avoidance in my son's. What is it I asked, though? Something deep inside told me this wasn't going to be good. Kelsey sat up straighter, her posture like a judge ready to deliver a verdict. I'd seen her like this before whenever she told Nathan not to visit his mother, or when she insisted on changing family traditions to be more convenient for her side. Nathan and I have talked. Kelsey began, her voice feigning gentleness. Now that Robert's gone, this house seems too big for you. I blinked, not understanding. Too big, I repeated. I've lived here for over 30 years. I know every creak in the floorboards, every stubborn faucet. And that's exactly the problem, Kelsey interrupted. You're not young anymore, and maintaining a house this large is very expensive. We think it would be best if you moved somewhere more suitable, she continued. Her voice was as cold as iron. I felt my chest tighten. Move out. This is my home. Robert and I built a life here. Nathan grew up here. Nathan spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. Mom, Kelsey's right. Keeping this house is too much for you now. I'm not useless, I said, my voice cracking. Your father and I scrimped and saved for this house. Every room here holds a memory. But memories don't pay the bills or the property taxes, Kelsey replied. Let's be realistic, Margaret. I looked her straight in the eyes. This woman, the one who had slowly pushed me out of my son's life for the past 15 years. She made Nathan believe that Sunday dinners were too much pressure, that Thanksgiving should be balanced between both sides, when in truth, it always leaned toward her family. What exactly are you suggesting? I asked, though I already knew the answer. A senior living community, Kelsey said softly, as if bestowing a gift. They have activities people your age. You won't be so lonely in this big empty house. I turned to Nathan, hoping my son would object, would take his mother's side. You really think I should sell this house, the place where your father and I spent our entire lives? He avoided my eyes. The truth is, this house has a lot of potential. We're thinking about expanding our family. That sentence hit me like a bucket of ice water. They didn't just want me gone, they wanted the house. I was stunned. Every word from my son felt like a quiet blade piercing my heart. They didn't just want me to leave. They wanted to take the house that Robert and I had spent our entire lives caring for. A place where every brick, every wall was a memory, now reduced to a valuable asset in their eyes. "You should accept reality," Kelsey continued, no longer pretending to be gentle. "Now that Robert's gone, you have no reason to stay here anymore." I looked over at Nathan, the same boy who used to crawl into my lap and cry over nightmares when he was little. Now he sat there nodding in agreement with his wife, without a hint of shame. "This house was Robert's to begin with," Kelsey said like another splash of cold water. "Now that he's gone, it belongs to Nathan." It felt like I was being pushed out of my own life. I stood up slowly. My head was spinning, but my voice was remarkably calm. "I'll need time to make arrangements." 2 weeks, Kelsey cut in curtly. "That's enough time for you to find another place and call a moving service. 2 weeks, not 2 months. No time to grieve, no proper condolences. Just 2 weeks to dismantle 32 years of marriage and pack it into a few cardboard boxes." Nathan finally looked me in the eye. But what I saw there wasn't anger. It wasn't regret. It was indifference. A complete indifference to his own mother's pain. "This is for your own good," he said, as if trying to convince himself. I returned to the bedroom still faintly scented with Robert's cologne, the place where just 1 week ago I had sat beside him as his heart stopped beating. His reading glasses still lay neatly on the nightstand. I looked in the mirror. The woman reflected back looked older than 71, with limp silver hair and hollow eyes dulled by shock. I would have to leave this place, this home filled with love, marriage, and family, all because my son wanted more space for future children. But as I sat quietly in the dark, something inside me began to awaken, not anger, not hatred, but a seed of resolve, a faint spark beneath the ashes. Robert had always handled the family finances. He used to say I didn't need to worry about numbers, that he'd take care of everything so I could be at ease. But he also taught me to be cautious, to pay attention to the details. I calculated silently. Tomorrow, I would go to the bank. I needed to know exactly, after 32 years together, what Robert had left behind. And for whom. The next morning, I sat alone in the kitchen, cradling a second cup of coffee, watching sunlight slip through the curtains. 10 days had passed since that awful dinner. The house suddenly felt suffocating, not because of the furniture, but because of the waiting for me to leave. Nathan and Kelsey had visited twice to reassess the space. They measured rooms, discussed renovations, all without acknowledging me. I had even overheard Kelsey on the phone with a contractor. "The house will be ready as soon as the old lady moves out." For 10 days, I felt like I was living in a freezing dream. I opened each drawer, held each picture frame folded, each tablecloth with trembling hands. Emotions flowed like water, unstoppable, ungraspable. But this morning, for the first time, I felt ready. Not to leave, to face what was coming. I drove to First National Bank, where Robert and I had gone monthly for the past 20 years. Usually I'd wait in the car while he handled the paperwork. He would say, "Numbers are my thing. You just bring that smile." Today I had no one beside me. Mrs. Linda Raymond, the bank manager, greeted me with a sympathetic look. "Mrs. Ellsworth, I'm so sorry about Robert's passing. He was a true gentleman." "Thank you, Linda," I replied, clutching my purse tightly in my lap. "Now I need to know what my finances actually are. He handled everything, and now I feel completely lost." Linda nodded. "I understand. Let me look through your accounts." She typed on her keyboard, then paused. "Oh, that's odd. Is something wrong?" My heart began to pound. "Not exactly wrong," Linda said hesitantly. "It's just There are more accounts than I expected. She began printing statements. The joint checking account, the balance was decent enough to live on for a few months if I was careful. Then the joint savings account, a much larger sum enough to support me comfortably for years. I exhaled a shaky breath. At least I wasn't penniless as I had feared. But Linda kept staring at the screen. "Mrs. Ellsworth, I see several other accounts here, and it appears they're all under your name only." "Mine," I said blankly. "Robert never mentioned." Linda flipped through records. "There are 2 fixed-term savings certificates, a money market account, and—" She paused. "A trust fund established 5 years ago." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Robert never said—" "Never. He may have had you sign certain documents," Linda explained gently. "Possibly when updating addresses or switching banks. Many husbands don't want to worry their wives, so they don't go into detail." I looked at the papers. They bore my signature. The dates matched the times I had accompanied him to the bank. Robert had done everything, behind my back, not to deceive, to prepare, to protect me. And I realized Wade and Kelsey had no idea about any of this. I clutched the printed statements, my head spinning. Now was the time to uncover the truth. Because if my husband had spent the last 5 years quietly building a fortress to shield me, then maybe I didn't have to bow to anyone. I left the bank with my handbag heavy with paperwork. But the true weight wasn't the papers, it was everything I had just uncovered. Robert had prepared everything, not just so I could live comfortably, but so I could live independently. Instead of heading home, I turned into a familiar little cafe. I sat alone in my car, reopening the stack of bank documents. Numbers don't lie. 2 savings accounts in my name. 1 money market account, receiving regular transfers from our joint account. And 1 trust fund, the Ellsworth Construction Trust, with consistent deposits for the past 5 years. My husband had quietly built a fortress around me. Each transfer was a brick. Each account was a layer of protection, and none of it Wade and Kelsey knew about. I flipped through the statements from the trust fund. Strangely, the largest deposits often came right after Wade's visits home, or after phone calls where Kelsey complained about financial difficulties. Robert had helped his son, but always ensured an even larger amount went to me, as if he always knew a day would come when I'd need to stand on my own. My phone buzzed. A message from Wade Mom Kelsey found a realtor. "We're thinking of listing the house next week. Hope you found a new place. We'll try to help with the move." I read the message over and over. They truly thought I was helpless, that I would quietly vanish so they could move in as if this house were some belated wedding gift. But they didn't realize their plan was built on sand, and I had just discovered the bedrock underneath. Tomorrow I would call an accountant. I needed to know what exactly was the Ellsworth Construction Trust. Had Robert really sold the company as Wade claimed, or was there more to uncover? Morrison and Associates sat quietly tucked between a laundromat and a tax service office in an aging strip mall. I'd never been there before. Robert had always handled all the financial meetings. I used to think he just didn't want to burden me with complicated paperwork. But now I understood he had kept an entire long-term plan hidden to protect me from our own son, Mrs. Carolyn Harper Roberts, accountant of 15 years, wore her silver hair in a neat bun with sharp eyes behind thin metal-rimmed glasses. She welcomed me with quiet respect. "First, allow me to extend my condolences," Mrs. Ellsworth Carolyn said. Robert was a man of integrity, always punctual, always prepared. "I'll miss him dearly." "Thank you. Honestly, I wish I knew him in business the way you did." I placed the stack of bank statements on her desk. "I've just discovered several accounts in a trust fund Robert left behind. I need to understand what he's been doing all these years." Carolyn pulled up some files on her computer. "You didn't know about any of this. I truly didn't. Wade, my son, told me the company was sold long ago and there wasn't much left." Carolyn frowned. "The company was never sold." 5 years ago, Robert simply restructured it. He transferred all the business assets into a trust called the Ellsworth Construction Trust. And you are the sole beneficiary. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. I, the owner of the construction company. The trust is in my name, I repeated, hardly believing it. Yes, on paper the business belongs to the trust. And you own that trust entirely. Carolyn printed out some financial reports. Robert was very cautious in choosing projects. He didn't take risky big contracts, only reliable clients who paid on time. And the result was steady success. I scanned the numbers, consistent annual profits distributions made into the trust. I was stunned. Wade had said his father retired with nothing. But in truth, the company was still generating hundreds of thousands in revenue every year. But Robert retired, didn't he? I asked. He wasn't working anymore. He stepped away from daily operations, Carolyn explained, but he still made strategic decisions. Day-to-day management was handled by Jack Monroe, Robert's longtime assistant. I nodded. Jack had been Robert's first apprentice nearly 20 years ago. I remembered seeing Jack at the funeral, genuinely grief-stricken. So, now I'm the one in charge. Yes, you can keep the structure and let Jack continue running it. Or you have the right to sell, dissolve, or do anything you wish with it. I clenched my hands. What about Wade? He once asked for a loan from the company. Is that true? Carolyn pulled a folder from the cabinet. Yes, several times. Every loan was formally recorded as a business loan with contracts, interest rates, and repayment schedules. I flipped through the pages. Robert's and Wade's signatures were there clear as day. Each loan was tens of thousands. In total, nearly $90,000. And most of them were overdue. Now those debts belong to me. Exactly. You can demand repayment or revise the terms, but legally, Wade owes you nearly $90,000. I sat in silence, not because of the money, but because of the truth. Wade had told me the company was gone, when in fact he owed me enough to buy the house outright. Carolyn looked at me for a moment and then added gently, "There's one more thing you should know." I looked up. "Last month, Wade called me," she said. He said now that Robert had passed, he'd be taking over the company and asked me to prepare ownership transfer documents. And how did you respond? I told him we'd need a legal authorization from the trust's beneficiary, that is from you. When I said that, Wade seemed truly shocked to learn you were involved in the financial structure. I exhaled deeply, but something inside me was beginning to strengthen. Wade thought his mother knew nothing, thought he could seize everything while I was grieving. But Robert had made sure that would never happen. "Mrs. Harper, I'd like to meet with Jack Monroe as soon as possible," I said firmly. "And I want to explore all legal options regarding Wade's outstanding loans. Absolutely. I'll call Jack this afternoon, and of course everything will be kept strictly confidential if you wish." I smiled slightly for the first time in weeks. Please keep it all quiet. It's time I learned exactly what cards I'm holding before anyone else tries to guess what's in my hand. The next morning I sat in the kitchen brewing coffee for myself and a guest who was about to arrive. The heavy sound of a truck stopped in the driveway. I looked out the window. Jack Monroe, my husband's loyal foreman, was stepping out of his vehicle. He looked just as I remembered: rough, calloused hands, broad shoulders, neatly trimmed salt and pepper hair, and the weary eyes of a man who'd spent a lifetime in physical labor. But today, there was something else in Jack's eyes' worry. We sat across from each other in the kitchen, the same kitchen where just last week Wade and Kelsey had been measuring walls to expand the layout. I offered Jack a cup of coffee. He gripped it tightly and got straight to the point. "I need to be honest, Mrs. Ellsworth. I haven't been sleeping since Mr. Robert passed. A few days ago, Nathan came by the site, and what he said didn't sit right with me." I looked at Jack calmly. "What did he say to you?" He said the family was going through financial difficulties and needed to restructure the assets. Jack raised an eyebrow. He asked me to list all the equipment contracts and the current cash flow. I bit my lip. And did he ask for keys to the supply room and office? He did. And how did you respond? I said, I only take instructions from someone with legal authority. Mr. Robert told me if anything ever happened, I was to wait for direction from the beneficiary. And he never once said that was Nathan. I gave a faint smile. He was right, Jack. I pulled out the stack of documents Carolyn Harper had given me the day before and placed them on the table. I'm the sole beneficiary of the trust. Henderson Construction belongs to me. Jack's eyes widened as he stared at the papers. Good heavens. I knew he was cautious, but I never imagined he planned this far ahead. He knew, I replied. He knew his son. Jack sighed. Are you planning to keep the company running? Honestly, me and the crew are worried we'll be replaced. We've got mortgages, kids' loans. Jack, I want everything to stay the same, I said firmly. You run it. I'll oversee it, just like Robert did. A spark lit up in Jack's eyes. Thank you, ma'am. I promise to be as loyal to you as I was to Mr. Robert. We've built a solid reputation over the years, and I won't let anyone tear that down. I nodded. But I need to know something. Has Nathan ever contacted you directly about financial matters? Jack hesitated. A few times. When Mr. Robert was away, he'd come by the office asking about cash flow, upcoming payments. Once he even asked to borrow a little from the company fund, called it a small investment. And what did you say? I always told him to speak with Mr. Robert. I wouldn't release a penny without clear instructions. I let out a breath of relief. The last time I saw him, he showed up at the bank the same day we deposited a large payment from the Morrison Tower project, Jack added. Too much of a coincidence. He said he was just passing by, but he specifically asked how much was deposited. I tightened my grip. Nathan had been tracking the company's cash flow, waiting for Robert to weaken, planning to swoop in. Jack, in your opinion, does Nathan know the true scale of the company? Jack furrowed his brow. I think he suspects something, but Mr. Robert kept business and personal finances completely separate. On paper, the company looks pretty modest. And about the money Nathan received over the past 5 years, do you have records? Jack pulled out a worn, dog-eared notebook. Mr. Robert told me to write everything down, even the smallest amounts. According to this, the total is $93,000. But he never pushed Nathan to repay. He just had him sign the loan agreements and left it at that. I nodded. Carolyn had said the debt was $87,000, but Jack had additional data. That meant my son owed nearly $100,000 and still thought he was about to inherit the entire company. Suddenly, a car pulled up in the driveway. I looked out the window. Nathan's Honda Pilot was parked right behind Jack's truck. It's him, I said quietly. I don't want him to know we've been talking about the company. Jack quickly gathered the papers. Mrs. Ellsworth, I don't know what you plan to do, but I'm with you. Mr. Robert trusted you, and so do I. I nodded. Thank you, Jack. I think today's going to be memorable. Nathan walked in without knocking, as always. Hey, Mom, he said coolly, glancing at Jack. Didn't expect to see a visitor. Jack stopped by to check in, I replied evenly. He's always been thoughtful like that. Nathan ignored me and turned to Jack. Actually, I'm glad you're here. We need to talk about the company. Jack kept his face neutral. What about it? Now that my dad's gone, I'll be taking over the family assets. I need a full report on all contracts, assets, and cash flow, and I need access to the company accounts to assess the current situation. Jack spoke slowly. And who exactly should I send that information to? Someone with legal authorization? I assume Nathan raised his eyebrows, pausing. To me, obviously. I'm his son, the heir. Do you have documents proving your authority over the company? The kitchen went silent. The ticking of the clock suddenly felt like thunder. "Jack, you don't understand." Nathan began now, switching to an arrogant tone. "I'm not stealing anything. I'm just organizing my father's estate to ensure everyone's taken care of." "In that case," Jack replied, "I just want to be sure who I'm taking orders from." Nathan turned to me for the first time, showing signs of unease. "Mom, tell Jack. Tell him I'm just handling Dad's affairs." I clenched my hands, then said calmly, "Actually, I think Jack is right. Your father was always careful with paperwork. Everything should be clear and legal." Nathan froze, not because I disagreed, but because I dared to do so in front of someone else. What he said startled. "What the hell are you talking about, Mom?" I looked him in the eye, and for the first time in years I felt no fear, no guilt, no weakness. Only one thing remained. Power was back in my hands. 3 days later, at exactly 7:00 a.m., the phone rang. I didn't even have to look to know who it was. I picked up. Nathan's voice was tight with forced calm, barely hiding his anger. "Mom, we need to talk. Now. Kelsey and I are coming over," I replied evenly. "Bit early for a surprise visit, don't you think?" But the line had already gone dead. I didn't rush. I changed into a navy blue dress, the one Robert used to say made me look like a real lady of the house. If this was going to be a confrontation, I was going to walk into it as the owner, not the woman being thrown out. 20 minutes later, the clacking of Kelsey's high heels echoed up the front porch. I opened the door before they could knock. "Good morning," I said with a light smile, as if this were just a friendly visit. But Kelsey wasn't playing along. She marched into the living room, crossbody purse slung like she was ready to file a lawsuit. Nathan followed, face tense and cold. They stood tall, blocking the exit, a clear power play. "What are you playing at, Mom?" Nathan snapped, no longer bothering to be polite. "Jack says he won't give us any company information unless there's legal authorization." "What did you tell him?" I sat down in the armchair by the window, Robert's chair, where he used to read the morning paper. I calmly poured myself some tea, looking at them like this was just another normal weekend morning. "I simply told Jack to follow proper protocol," I replied. "Your father always valued procedure, and so should you." Kelsey tossed her purse onto the couch, her voice rising. "Nathan is his son. He's the rightful heir. What else do we need besides legal and authorized?" "You need documents proving ownership," I said clearly. "And, unfortunately for you both, Ellsworth Construction was removed from Robert's will 5 years ago." What Nathan's eyes bulged. I pulled out a stack of documents I had prepared in advance and laid them before them. Everything was transferred into a trust called Ellsworth Construction Trust, and the sole beneficiary is me. The silence in the room was as heavy as stone. Kelsey grabbed the paperwork, her hands trembling as she flipped through the pages. Nathan leaned in, reading along, his face going from red to ghostly pale. "This can't be real," Kelsey whispered. "You don't know anything about business. You didn't even manage the grocery bills at home." "That's exactly why Robert planned ahead," I said without bitterness. "He understood everyone's motivations, including mine and his son's." Nathan slumped into a chair as if someone had just slapped him. "But the company was failing," he stammered. "Dad always said profits couldn't keep up with costs. I thought there was nothing left." I quietly pulled out another folder, a 5-year profit report prepared by Carolyn Harper. "The company's been operating very successfully, and from what I can see, you've received a fair share of those profits yourself." I placed another stack of documents on the table. Nearly $100,000 in business loans with your signature, complete with repayment schedules. Kelsey snatched the new stack, skimmed it, then turned to Nathan. "What is this? You said your dad gave us that money. You said it was a gift to help us launch the business." Nathan stuttered. "Well, he never asked me to repay it. He didn't say anything about schedules. But he documented everything I said," my voice eerily calm. The accountant has records of every contract, email, and extension he granted you." Kelsey was genuinely panicking now. "But the house still belongs to Nathan. We still have the house, right?" I looked at her for a long moment, then asked gently, "Are you sure about that? Don't play games, Mrs. Ellsworth. This house is worth at least $400,000. You don't even have stable income to keep it." "You're right. But I do have steady revenue from the company Robert left me," I said, pulling out one last folder. "Also, 18 months ago, Robert took out a $350,000 mortgage against this house. The full amount was transferred into the trust. The house has no net value left in financial terms." Nathan was stunned. "No, Dad said the house was paid off." It was. But he was the sole owner at the time. I became co-owner by law after his passing. He didn't need anyone's permission to mortgage it. Then, "Why would he do that?" Nathan shouted. "Why would he burden the house with debt just to funnel money into a company he planned to hand over to?" "Mom," I clenched my hands but kept my voice level to protect me from this. I gestured slowly, encompassing the two people standing in front of me who were trying to strip a grieving widow of her home 1 week after burying her husband. He knew that if he wasn't careful, I might be seen as a burden. That I could be cast aside once I wasn't useful. And Robert wasn't going to let that happen. Kelsey could no longer hide her fury. You manipulated him. You tricked him into changing everything. "No, Kelsey," I said. "Robert did all of this while he was still healthy and fully in charge, and that fact alone, that he felt the need to prepare for this, says more about how he saw you both than I ever could." Nathan shakily placed the folder back on the table. "Mom, we can still talk about this. You can't run a company forever. I'm your only son. Let me help." I stood. "You're right. You are my son, but that doesn't give you the right to treat me like an unpaid maid." Kelsey snapped. "We'll sue. We'll take this all the way. You're welcome to try, but everything is legal and validated by our attorney. That attorney has already backed up every document with an independent counsel." Nathan stood too, looking dazed. I just don't understand, Mom. Why are you doing this to us?" I looked him in the eyes. "I'm not doing anything to you. I'm just refusing to let you do it to me." After Nathan and Kelsey left, the house fell into an eerie kind of silence. I stayed in the living room, sitting by the tea table where Robert and I had shared so many conversations. Everything was still in place. The cream-colored curtains, he chose the armchair where he used to read the newspaper, and the warm scent of old oak rising from the worn wooden floor. But I was different. I was no longer the woman who shrank back whenever her son raised his voice, no longer the wife who quietly let her husband handle every financial burden, no longer the mother who gave everything and dared not ask for respect in return. I was Margaret Ellsworth, the named owner of Ellsworth Construction, the rightful owner of this home. And most importantly, I was no longer someone who bowed her head. 3 days later, as I had predicted, I received a phone call early in the morning. My personal attorney, Mr. Howard Green, arrived at the house with a stack of documents. A composed, discreet man, always punctual and never one to waste words. "Good morning, Mrs. Ellsworth," he said as I welcomed him into the living room. "I've brought the final agreement for your review." I poured coffee and sat down by the window. "So, did they sign?" Howard gave a reserved smile. "With some legal pressure, yes. At first, Nathan's lawyer argued that family ties should take precedence over financial contracts, but the law doesn't run on emotion." I opened the folder. Each page was a testament to Robert's foresight. Each clause a legal fortress protecting me from greed disguised as inheritance. Mrs. Ellsworth Howard said the total debt, principal, interest, and penalties exceeds $96,000. Under this agreement, they must repay it over 8 years otherwise. Otherwise, I have the right to sue, seize assets, or garnish wages. I finished his sentence without waiting. I had learned quickly, especially once I realized how easily my rights had been dismissed. Howard nodded. In addition, we've included a clause allowing the company to exercise income garnishment if they default. I took a sip of coffee. Instead of bitterness, I felt relief. Finally, I wasn't the one sitting in silence enduring. "Anything else, Howard?" He pulled out an envelope. A handwritten letter from Nathan. It arrived yesterday by mail. I opened the envelope and unfolded a short note. The handwriting was familiar, messy, but sincere. "Mom, I know you won't forgive me easily, but I want you to understand I finally see that what Dad did was right. It took losing everything for me to realize how much I took for granted. Kelsey and I are seeing a marriage counselor. I'm working 2 jobs to pay off the debt on time. I hope one day you'll let me sit down and talk to you again. I'm sorry. Nathan." I folded the letter and set it aside. I believed he was sincere. But I also knew that sincerity had come too late and had been born out of consequence, not conscience. Howard asked, "Would you like me to draft a reply?" I shook my head. If he wants to rebuild trust, he'll have to do it like the debt, slowly, consistently, and over time. That evening I poured myself a glass of wine and stepped out onto the back porch, settling into the wicker chair Robert had painted himself. The sea breeze played with my hair. I looked out over the ocean, not through the tired eyes of a widow, but with the pride of a woman who had reclaimed her rightful place. Robert didn't just leave me assets. He left me freedom and, more importantly, the right to choose. I could stay in this house, but I could also leave. Not because I was being pushed out, but because I wanted to live a life that was fully mine. And I had made my choice. A small cottage by the sea in Mendocino, which Robert had quietly purchased under the trust 3 years ago. Beside the property deed was a handwritten note. "For Maggie, when you're ready to live among the sea breeze and free from anyone's schedule but your own." He knew. He had known for a long time that I would one day need to step out of everyone's shadow and live for myself. Tomorrow I will move there, not because I was cast aside, but because I deserve a place that is entirely my own. 6 months after the final confrontation with Nathan and Kelsey, I stood on the wooden porch of my little seaside cottage, a cup of hot coffee in hand, watching the sun slowly rise over the Pacific horizon. The morning light spilled across the water like golden honey. The sea breeze was gentle, carrying with it the salty scent of freedom. This house is much smaller than the old one. No grand dining room, no backyard big enough for family barbecues. But every part of it, every framed picture, every armchair, every beige curtain was chosen by me. It took me 32 years to realize I do have taste. I have the right to like what I like to dislike, what I dislike to choose to discard, without needing anyone's approval. I no longer live in a shared home. I live in a home of my own. Ellsworth Construction continues to run under Jack Monroe's management. He calls me every Friday, just as Robert once did, to report on contracts and finances. Quarterly profits are still transferred into my personal account from the trust. I don't worry about money, and I certainly don't worry about anyone suddenly demanding I step aside from my own life anymore. During one of our company audits, attorney Howard Green discovered something interesting. 3 years before his passing, Robert had bought this cottage by the sea in the name of the trust. Attached to the deed was a handwritten note. "For Maggie, when you're ready to live among the sea breeze and on no one's schedule but your own." I cried when I read that. Cried because I missed him. because I realized he had thought of me further than his own life would allow, and because I knew, even though he was no longer here, he was still taking care of me gently, silently, in his own way. This morning felt more special than usual. Howard was coming not for legal battles or contract negotiations, but to tie up the final thread from my old life. At exactly 10 hours, the doorbell rang. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee using my new French press and invited him into the glass sunroom overlooking the sea, what had become our familiar meeting room. Howard opened his briefcase and carefully handed me the final file. "This is the official settlement agreement between you and Mr. Nathan Ellsworth," he said. "They've formally committed to repaying the full $96,000 within 8 years, with the condition that they cannot miss more than 2 consecutive payments. If they do, the company has the right to garnish wages and seize any assets under Nathan's name." I nodded. "I hope it doesn't come to that," I said. "But at least I'm no longer powerless." Howard nodded with quiet respect. "There's one more item I thought you might appreciate," he said, pulling out an envelope. A handwritten letter from Nathan. I opened it and read quickly. The handwriting was still Nathan's clumsy, familiar, full of effort. "Mom, I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I want you to know I finally understand why Dad did what he did. Kelsey and I are in marriage counseling. I've taken a second job doing night deliveries. It's not easy, but maybe I deserve to feel some of what you went through. If you're ever willing, I'd love to talk to you again like we used to. Nathan." I set the letter aside and sat in silence for a long while. Howard asked, "Would you like me to draft a reply?" I shook my head. If Nathan wants to rebuild our relationship, it'll have to be like repaying that debt little by little, consistently and with sincerity. By dusk, I stepped onto the porch again with a glass of red wine. Above me, orange clouds faded into deep purple. Waves lapped the rocky cliffs below in rhythm, a wordless song of time and calm. I had everything I needed: a peaceful home, a quiet business that still produced value, a position that couldn't be taken from me, and above all, a life that no longer required anyone's permission for me to live as I truly am. Tonight, like every night since I moved here, I would sit quietly, listen to the ocean, and whisper a thank you to the man who loved me enough to see beyond his own lifetime. "Thank you, Robert," I said softly. "You didn't just build me a house, you built me a fortress." One Tuesday morning, the landline in my seaside cottage rang. I didn't recognize the number, but something nudged me to answer. "Hello, is this Mrs. Ellsworth?" A young woman's voice, gentle, slightly hesitant. "Yes, this is she. My name is Linda Harper, daughter of Carolyn Harper, your late husband's accountant. I'm a nurse at the regional hospital. I hope I'm not disturbing you." I smiled softly. "I remember Carolyn mentioning you. What can I do for you, Linda?" She took a deep breath, then spoke quickly and with purpose. "Well, I'm starting a support group for older women who've been financially exploited, often by their own family. My mother briefly mentioned your situation, and I was wondering, would you be willing to share your story?" I was taken aback. I had always thought I'd let the past rest, to live my remaining days peacefully without revisiting old wounds. But there was something in her voice that made it hard to say no. "I'm not sure I'd know what to say, Linda." "You'd be surprised how many women are going through the same thing," she replied. "Women dismissed by their children, pushed out of their own homes, treated like they've outlived their usefulness. Your story could be a guiding light for them." I looked out toward the sea. A gull dipped toward the surface and soared up again, a small fish clutched in its beak. I exhaled slowly, then said, "All right, I'll join. But I don't want to speak about revenge or triumph. Then what would you like to speak about?" "I want to speak about the difference between being a loving mother and being treated like a doormat. I want to stress the importance of knowing what you have, knowing where you stand, and about the final gift my husband left me: protection from my own family." The talk was scheduled for a late afternoon near the end of the month in a small auditorium at the hospital where Linda worked. About 20 women attended. The youngest looked to be in her 40s, the eldest well into her 80s. I stepped up to the podium with a simple note card and a heart that still bore scars but no longer trembled. "My name is Margaret Ellsworth," I began, "and this is not the story of a wounded widow. This is the story of a woman who didn't know she had the right to say no, and then learned how on the hardest day of her life." I told them about the dinner after my husband's funeral, when my daughter-in-law told me to pack my things like I was a discarded piece of furniture. About the cold eyes of my son, whom I had once rocked to sleep and nursed through every fever. About the long silence of a husband, not because he didn't care, but because he was quietly building my final shield. And about the journey from grief to clarity to finally reclaiming my rightful place. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't use big dramatic words, but no one moved in the room. Some eyes welled with tears, breaths grew slower. When I shared how Robert had quietly created a trust fund, protected the company, and drafted formal loan contracts with our own son, several women nodded in deep admiration. He made sure I never had to beg for dignity from those who once claimed to love me, I said. He left me freedom, and when I embraced it, I found myself again. Linda was the first to rise in applause when I finished. Then the whole room erupted, not loudly but deeply. It echoed in the soul. An elderly woman in the front row approached me afterward. "Thank you," she whispered. "You just gave voice to what so many of us have carried inside." I gently squeezed her hand. "We are not invisible. We just need to remember how to walk into our own homes, not as guests, but as owners." That night I sat again on my porch wine glass in hand. The moon had risen. Its silver light blanketed the waves, making the sea shimmer like silk. I thought of the women I had met that day, the eyes that once lowered with shame, the hands that had been pulled off the wheel of their own lives. And I told myself if someone like me, a 71-year-old widow, once pushed out of her own home, could reclaim her place, then anyone could. I raised my glass toward the ocean, a silent thank you to Robert. You protected me not with words, but with action. And today, I protect others like me the same way. The morning after my hospital talk, I woke up earlier than usual. The sea breeze poured in through the cracked window. The sky hadn't fully brightened, but I no longer wanted to stay in bed. There was a strange feeling within me, as if I'd crossed an invisible threshold without realizing it. I was no longer the poor widow people whispered about. I was no longer the abandoned old mother I once felt ashamed of being. I was Margaret Ellsworth, the woman who had survived a fall that should have crushed her. And now I was standing not just upright, but tall. 2 weeks later, my attorney Howard Green scheduled a final meeting to close out the last remaining matters of Robert's estate. We met at a small cafe near Mendocino, the one with his favorite egg tart counter, and our usual corner table overlooking a lavender garden. "Good morning, Mrs. Ellsworth," he greeted me as I arrived. "I think you can call me Maggie now," I said with a smile. Howard returned the smile, rare for someone as composed as he was. "Well then, Maggie," he said, opening his case today, "is the last step formalizing full company ownership under your name, updating debt terms for Nathan, and closing the asset dispute file." I nodded. "Any updates on Nathan and Kelsey's repayments?" Howard gave a slow nod. "They're on track. 3 payments have been made on time. As far as I know, Nathan is working full-time for a night delivery service. Kelsey remained silent. I sipped my tea without commenting. I wasn't glad. I wasn't upset. I simply acknowledged the facts detached, no longer tethered by pain. Howard hesitated for a moment, then pulled out an envelope. There's something I haven't yet mentioned. After the dispute was settled, I received a call from their lawyer. They wanted to renegotiate one clause. I raised an eyebrow. They requested a family forgiveness clause, he explained, meaning that if your relationship with Nathan is restored, the debt could be reduced or even forgiven. It was phrased as a soft proposal. I laughed, not out of amusement. Forgiveness doesn't belong in contract clauses, Howard. They still don't understand what actually happened. Howard nodded. That's exactly what I told them. He handed me the final documents. Confirmed debt, $96, $250 payment term, 8 years. In case of more than 2 missed payments, Ellsworth Construction reserves the right to garnish Nathan's wages, seize titled assets, file civil suit. I reviewed each clause and signed at the bottom. I wasn't doing this out of vengeance. I was doing it for justice, because forgiveness without accountability is just a trap waiting to reset the damage. That evening, while baking in the kitchen, the phone rang. I wiped my hands and picked it up. Unknown number, but this time I wasn't anxious. Mrs. Ellsworth. A man's voice, low, familiar. This is Tom Bradley. Sorry for calling late, but I thought you'd want to know. Tom had managed Ellsworth Construction since Robert's full retirement. He still called me weekly with updates. What's going on? Tom, Nathan just called me, he said, pausing. Said he wants to come back to the company. I said nothing. He said he's willing to do anything, even basic labor. What would you like me to do? I looked out the kitchen window. The sea beyond was calm, still as glass. I thought of the son who once called me the woman temporarily staying in his father's house. I thought of every dollar Robert had quietly protected, every signature Nathan had so casually ignored. Do you believe he's sincere? I asked. Tom paused before answering. I don't know, but this time, he didn't sound fake. I nodded even though he couldn't see me. Then let him start like anyone else. No shortcuts, no special treatment. Understood, ma'am. Before he hung up, I added, Thank you, Tom, not just for this, but for being the only man who ever dared tell me the truth, even when it wasn't pleasant. Tom was silent for a moment, then said, You didn't rise alone, Mrs. Ellsworth. Robert built everything. You just had the courage to step through the door. And you did. I set the phone down and turned back to the half-finished pie in the oven. The flame glowed steadily. The scent of cinnamon filled the kitchen. I closed my eyes briefly, not to dream, but to remember. Sometimes freedom doesn't come from winning a battle. It comes from no longer needing to fight at all. 1 year after my 65th birthday, the day I once sat alone with a cold cake and an empty table, my home was now filled with laughter. String lights hung in gentle waves across the porch, glowing under the soft spring sunset. On the wooden deck, a long table held cherry tarts, cinnamon cookies, and a pitcher of chilled lemonade. But the sweetest thing wasn't on any plate. It was this feeling for the first time in years that I was truly the owner of my own life. Nathan had kept his commitment for nearly 10 months. He showed up to the construction site earlier than anyone worked tirelessly under Jack Monroe's supervision, never once complaining. He was no longer the heir apparent, he was a real worker now. And that made me begin to look at my son differently. I hadn't forgiven him. It wasn't that easy, but I acknowledged his effort, and I allowed him to take the first steps back if he was willing to walk slowly and on his own 2 feet. Kelsey remained distant. I didn't blame her. She couldn't admit failure, nor was it easy for her to forgive a woman she once deemed a burden. But today they were both here at the small gathering I hosted in my cottage by the sea. No pressure, no obligation, just a simple invitation with a note that read, I'm still here. If you want to understand what dignity looks like, come and see. The waves lapped gently against the rocks like a soft whisper. Local children, the neighbors' kids, played tag in the garden. A middle-aged woman from the support group I once spoke to sipped tea beside me. "Mrs. Ellsworth," she said, "I didn't know where to begin. But because of you, I finally went to the bank and checked the accounts my ex-husband used to hide. I found a savings account in my name untouched for 18 years. I smiled. "We don't need to speak loudly to be strong," I said. "We only need to know that we have the right to exist and be respected." She laughed through misty eyes. "You have no idea how many people you've inspired." I didn't answer immediately. I simply lifted my teacup, a silent toast to the man who had laid the first bricks of the foundation I now stood on. As evening settled, the guests trickled out. Only Nathan and I remained on the porch, the sea breeze beginning to chill. "Can I ask you something, Mom?" His voice was slow, cautious. No arrogance, no avoidance. I nodded. "If one day you truly forgive me, will you say it?" I looked at him for a long moment. "No, I won't say it." He looked surprised. "Why not?" I smiled softly. "Because real forgiveness doesn't need to be announced. You'll know not through words but in the way I look at you, welcome you into my home and pour you a cup of tea like this." He bowed his head. "Mom, I still don't deserve it." "Maybe not," I said. "But what matters isn't whether you deserve it now. It's whether you keep trying to become someone who does." After Nathan left, I began tidying the porch. The lanterns swayed in the breeze like little stars hanging low over the earth. I took my wine glass and walked to the rocky bluff out front, where waves kissed the high stone ledge. I stood there feeling the wind brush through my hair, the cool stone beneath my bare feet, and the sky twinkling above. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in a year I whispered a single sentence. "Robert, I'm okay now. Truly okay. I'm no longer someone cast out of her own home. No longer someone who has to ask for space to exist. No longer silent out of fear of being called a burden. No longer needing anyone to justify my presence. Now I wonder about those of you who've stayed with me until the very last word. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Have you ever experienced something similar, being turned away by family, or forced to stay silent in the face of a painful truth? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. And while you're here, I'll leave 2 of the most beloved stories from this channel on the screen, tales that will surprise you, move you, and maybe help you see a part of yourself in them. Thank you for staying until the end. Truly thank you.